The curse. I received a letter one dreary afternoon. It was from an old college friend, Tom, who had recently inherited an abandoned factory in Crescent Falls. He wanted me to document the restoration process for a book. The idea intrigued me. As a writer, I was always looking for new material. I packed my bags and headed to Crescent Falls, unaware of the horrors that awaited me. The factory stood at the edge of town, a colossal structure of rusted metal and broken windows. As I approached, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Tom greeted me at the entrance, his face pale and eyes haunted. He seemed relieved to see me, but something was unsettling in his demeanor. Tom shared the factory's history over dinner. It had been shut down in the 1940s after a series of mysterious accidents. Workers had reported strange noises, shadows moving in the corners, and a pervasive sense of dread. Many believed the factory was cursed, but no one knew why. I set up my equipment in a small office on the second floor. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the distant dripping of water. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard faint whispers. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the voices grew louder and more distinct. Someone, or something, was calling my name. The next day, Tom showed me around the factory. We explored the vast, empty halls and dusty machinery. In one of the storage rooms, I saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye. It was quick, but unmistakable. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. I found an old journal hidden in a desk drawer. It belonged to a worker named Samuel, who had documented the strange occurrences in the factory. His entries spoke of ghostly apparitions, disembodied voices, and a dark presence that seemed to lurk in the basement. Curiosity got the better of me, and I convinced Tom to explore the basement with me. The air grew colder as we descended the stairs, and an overwhelming sense of dread enveloped us. The basement was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and damp, crumbling walls. In the dim light, I saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. When I blinked, it was gone. That night, I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my door. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door, only to find the hallway empty. As I turned to go back inside, I saw a translucent figure standing in the corner. It was a woman, her eyes hollow and her mouth twisted in a silent scream. I froze in terror as she slowly faded away. Tom and I discovered strange markings on the walls, symbols that neither of us recognized. They seemed to glow faintly in the darkness, pulsing with an eerie energy. We decided to photograph them and research their meaning, hoping to find some answers. Our research led us to a local historian who specialized in occult practices. He told us the symbols were part of an ancient ritual meant to summon and bind spirits. It seemed the factory had been built on cursed land, and the rituals performed there had trapped the spirits of the dead. Desperate for answers, we decided to hold a seance. We gathered in the old break room, lighting candles and reciting incantations from Samuel's journal. The air grew thick with tension, and a cold wind swept through the room. Suddenly, the candles flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. A ghostly voice echoed through the room, whispering, "Help us." After the seance, I began experiencing vivid visions. I saw the factory as it once was, bustling with workers. But then, the scene would shift, and I'd witness the horrific accidents that plagued the factory. Blood, screams, and shadows enveloped my mind, leaving me gasping for breath. Tom grew increasingly agitated. He confessed that he had been having nightmares ever since he inherited the factory. In his dreams, a sinister figure warned him to leave the factory or face dire consequences. We both knew we couldn't ignore the warning, but we were determined to uncover the truth. We stumbled upon a hidden room behind one of the walls in the basement. Inside, we found old photographs, newspaper clippings, and a diary belonging to the factory's owner, William Cresswell. His writings revealed his obsession with the occult and his attempts to gain eternal life by sacrificing his workers. Armed with this knowledge, we decided to confront the dark presence in the factory. We returned to the basement, reciting the incantations to banish the spirits. The air grew thick with malevolence, and shadows swirled around us. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted, and the ghostly figure of William Cresswell appeared, his eyes burning with rage. Cresswell attacked, his spectral form lashing out with an otherworldly force. We fought back, using the rituals and symbols we had learned. The battle seemed endless, our strength waning as Cresswell's fury grew. Just when we thought we couldn't hold on any longer, a blinding light filled the room, and Cresswell screamed in agony before vanishing into thin air. The factory was eerily silent after the confrontation. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a sense of peace. We knew we had succeeded in freeing the trapped spirits. Exhausted but relieved, we made our way back to the office, determined to document the events and warn others about the dangers of tampering with the occult. We contacted a priest to perform a cleansing ritual on the factory grounds. As he blessed each room, the air grew lighter, and the remaining shadows dissipated. The factory, once a place of torment and despair, now felt like any other abandoned building, devoid of supernatural presence. With the factory cleansed, Tom and I prepared to leave Crescent Falls. The experiences had changed us, leaving us with a deeper understanding of the supernatural world. We vowed to stay in touch and continue researching the paranormal, but from a safe distance. As I drove away from Crescent Falls, I reflected on the events that had transpired. The factory's haunting had been a harrowing ordeal, but it had also been a profound journey into the unknown. I knew I would never forget the faces of the lost souls we had encountered, nor the lessons we had learned about the thin veil between our world and the next. The Echoes. My name is Alex Turner, a freelance journalist with a penchant for uncovering the unknown. It was a rainy October evening when I received the email. The subject line read, "The Old Ironworks, a story for the bold." Intrigued, I opened it and found a brief message: "If you seek the truth behind the disappearances, come to the old factory at midnight." Alone. The factory loomed in the distance, a silhouette against the stormy sky. As I approached, the wind howled through broken windows, producing an eerie wail. The iron gates creaked open, and I hesitated before stepping inside. The air was thick with the scent of rust and decay. Inside, my flashlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I moved through the factory floor, my footsteps echoing eerily. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering. I spun around but saw no one. The whispers grew louder, and I felt a cold breath on my neck. In a dusty office, I discovered an old journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with frantic scribbles. The entries detailed strange occurrences and the gradual descent into madness of a man named Edward Harlow, the factory's last foreman. He spoke of shadows that moved on their own and voices that drove workers to insanity. One entry mentioned a locked room in the basement, a place forbidden to all. Driven by curiosity, I found the basement stairs and descended. The air grew colder with each step. At the end of the corridor was a heavy iron door. With effort, I forced it open and was hit by a blast of icy air. Inside, the room was filled with old machinery and chains hanging from the ceiling. As I explored, a figure materialized in the corner. It was a spectral man, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. He raised a hand and pointed to a spot on the floor before vanishing. I inspected the spot and found a loose floorboard. Beneath it was a narrow passage, barely wide enough to crawl through. I squeezed in, my flashlight revealing a tunnel lined with old pipes and cobwebs. The air was thick and musty, making it hard to breathe. The tunnel opened into a large underground chamber. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the floor was littered with bones. In the center stood an ancient altar, stained with what looked like dried blood. The atmosphere was oppressive, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. As I examined the altar, I found another journal, this one older than the first. It spoke of a cult that had once used the factory for dark rituals, sacrificing workers to summon otherworldly entities. The last entry was a frantic plea for help, written in blood. Suddenly, the chamber grew colder, and I heard whispers all around me. Shadows moved on their own, forming grotesque shapes. Panicking, I fled back through the tunnel, feeling unseen hands clawing at me. I burst out into the basement, slamming the iron door behind me. Back on the factory floor, things had changed. The air was thick with malevolence, and shadows moved in the corners of my vision. I could hear distant screams and the clanging of machinery, though the factory was long abandoned. I knew I wasn't alone. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved deeper into the factory's history. I found old blueprints and discovered a series of hidden rooms and passages. Each room I explored revealed more about the factory's dark past and the spirits trapped within its walls. In one of the hidden rooms, I encountered another apparition, this one a woman with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. She whispered my name, sending chills down my spine. She told me that the factory hungered for souls, and it had chosen me as its next victim. Piecing together the clues, I realized that the factory was a conduit for dark energy, feeding off the fear and suffering of those who entered. The rituals performed there had opened a gateway to another realm, trapping the souls of the workers and anyone else who ventured inside. Determined to end the cycle, I decided to confront the entity that controlled the factory. Armed with the knowledge from the journals, I prepared a ritual to close the gateway and free the trapped souls. The factory resisted, with shadows clawing at me and voices screaming in my ears. In the heart of the factory, I performed the ritual, chanting the incantations and using the symbols I had found. The shadows swirled around me, growing more violent. I felt a malevolent presence trying to break my will, but I pressed on, determined to end the nightmare. As the ritual reached its climax, the ground shook, and the shadows converged into a single, towering figure. It demanded a sacrifice to be appeased. Knowing what had to be done, I offered myself, willing to be the last victim to end the factory's reign of terror. As I spoke the final words, a blinding light filled the factory. The shadows screamed and writhed before dissipating into nothingness. The air grew still, and a sense of peace washed over me. The souls trapped within the factory were finally free. Exhausted, I left the factory as dawn broke. The rain had stopped, and the first rays of sunlight pierced the clouds. The factory stood silent, its malevolent presence gone. I knew I had succeeded, but at a great personal cost. The experience had changed me forever. Back home, I wrote the story of the old ironworks, detailing every horrifying encounter and the ultimate sacrifice. The factory was condemned and eventually demolished, its dark history buried beneath the rubble. But the memories of that night haunt me still, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of our reality. And so, the tale of the old ironworks came to an end. But as I sit here, typing these final words, I can't help but feel a chill in the air, as if the factory's ghosts are not quite done with me yet. The haunting. It all started as a dare. My friends and I, always looking for the next thrill, decided to explore the old Shawcross textile factory on the outskirts of town. Abandoned for over 50 years, it was a local legend. Stories of ghosts, eerie sounds, and strange lights filled the town's lore. Armed with flashlights and a GoPro, we set out on a foggy autumn night, our breath visible in the crisp air. The factory loomed before us, its broken windows like hollow eyes watching our approach. Rusted gates creaked open as we pushed through, revealing a courtyard overgrown with weeds. The main entrance door hung off its hinges, an ominous welcome. We hesitated, then stepped inside, our flashlights piercing the oppressive darkness. The interior was a labyrinth of rusting machinery, collapsed ceilings, and scattered debris. As we moved deeper into the factory, a sense of unease settled over us. Shadows danced at the edges of our flashlight beams, and faint whispers echoed through the halls. We brushed it off as the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. We split up to cover more ground. I headed towards the old offices while the others explored the main production floor. As I climbed the rickety staircase, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but there was no one there. The footsteps continued, growing louder, and I ran, heart pounding, to the safety of the office at the top. The office was a time capsule from the 1950s, with dusty furniture and papers strewn about. A faded photograph on the wall caught my eye. Workers posed proudly in front of the factory, their faces stern and serious. As I studied it, a chill ran down my spine. One of the faces seemed to move, its eyes following me. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, using its light to navigate. On the desk, I found an old journal. The last entry, dated the day the factory closed, spoke of strange occurrences, machines starting on their own, ghostly figures, and an overwhelming sense of dread. It ended with a warning: leave this place before it claims you. Reuniting with my friends, I told them about the journal. We decided to investigate the basement, where the machinery had reportedly malfunctioned. The air grew colder as we descended, and a putrid smell filled our noses. The basement was a cavernous space, filled with towering machines covered in cobwebs. Suddenly, the machines roared to life, gears turning and belts spinning, despite being disconnected from any power source. Amidst the deafening noise, we saw it, a ghostly figure standing by an ancient loom, its eyes glowing an unnatural red. It watched us, its expression unreadable. Fear paralyzed us, but then it began to move towards us. We fled, scrambling up the stairs, the figure's footsteps echoing behind us. In our panic, we became separated. I found myself in a part of the factory I didn't recognize, the walls closing in around me. Every turn seemed to lead me deeper into the heart of the building. My flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows that played tricks on my mind. I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. I stumbled upon an old storeroom filled with forgotten artifacts, clothing, tools, and personal belongings left behind in haste. In the corner, I discovered a trapdoor leading to a hidden chamber. Curiosity overpowered my fear, and I descended into the unknown. The chamber was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Symbols and runes covered the walls, surrounding a makeshift altar in the center. Candles, long extinguished, stood around it, and a sense of malevolence hung in the air. It was clear that something dark had taken place here, something that still lingered. I hurried back to find my friends, determined to leave and never return. As I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the factory seemed to come alive. Whispers filled the air, and ghostly figures appeared and vanished at the edge of my vision. It was as if the building itself was trying to trap me. Finally, I found my friends near the entrance. They were visibly shaken, their eyes wide with fear. We shared our experiences, each story more terrifying than the last. Determined to leave, we headed for the exit, but the factory had other plans. As we approached the main door, it slammed shut with a force that shook the building. We tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped. The air grew heavy, and the temperature dropped. Our breath came out in white puffs as we huddled together, searching for another way out. With no other options, we decided to return to the basement, hoping to find an escape route. The descent was agonizing, each step filled with dread. The machines, silent now, loomed like sentinels in the dark. The ghostly figure was nowhere to be seen, but we knew it was watching. In the basement, we discovered an old service tunnel that seemed to lead outside. As we navigated its narrow passage, the walls began to close in, and the whispers grew louder. It was then we realized that the factory demanded a sacrifice. One of us would not make it out. Fear and desperation gripped us as we argued, the darkness feeding our paranoia. The tunnel seemed endless, and the sense of impending doom was palpable. It was then we heard the footsteps again, growing louder and closer. We had to make a choice, or the factory would choose for us. With heavy hearts, we drew straws. Jake, the bravest among us, drew the short one. He accepted his fate with a stoic nod, urging us to go on without him. As he turned back, the footsteps stopped, and an eerie silence filled the tunnel. We moved forward, tears in our eyes, leaving our friend behind. The tunnel eventually led to a rusted grate, which we managed to pry open. We emerged into the cold night air, the factory's oppressive presence lifting as we distanced ourselves from it. We were free, but the cost had been high. The whispers, however, seemed to follow us, a haunting reminder of the night's events. Months passed, but the factory never left our minds. Jake was never seen again, and the town's legends grew darker with our story. We tried to move on, but the nightmares persisted. One by one, my friends moved away, unable to bear the memories. I stayed, determined to uncover the truth about Shawcross Textile Factory. The whispers continued, growing louder each night, calling me back. I knew, deep down, that the factory was not done with me yet.